I am.
Okay.
So, I haven't quite figured out why they don't all show up for me in one view or another. So I have to just play around. There's got to be some kind of setting. It says when I click on it, it says like 16 of them are submitted, and then it only shows me 3 of them.
Okay,
So
yeah,
I
because
don't,
my,
you know,
do you want me to resend lab 3?
to upload it again.
Yeah.
I mean, you could try. You could try. I think it's something I'm doing on my end where I'm not seeing it
Oh, okay.
correctly. That's what I think.
Okay.
Um, but it seems like everything else is going in pretty well, right? It seems like the
Yeah, they're
homeworks and
loading.
stuff from mastering are loaded in there, and the exams are loaded in there, and it looks like the subtotals are adding up correctly, like the exam average, the quiz average, that all looks right to me. So hopefully that seemed right. I checked a few of them, I spot checked it, and they seemed to be right.
All right. Well, because the way I do mine is I scan it with my phone with that Adobe Reader and then
Mhm.
make it a PDF and then I load it that way. So
That works.
I still have it on file. So if you want me just to like unsubmit and then resubmit again, just let me know. I can do that. So
Okay, I'll let you
I
know,
just,
but I think I can figure something out. I think I'm just not clicking on the right area or something.
okay. I just don't
Um,
want to get marked down for it.
right, right. No, absolutely not.
Okay.
Because it always tells me when the person submitted it, so I
Oh,
know
okay.
that like you didn't submit it late. So, as far as Zoom goes, I've emailed people and I got a couple of responses about how to get a link through GCC. I I taught a year ago, I taught at Berkshire Community College, and that's who I have my Zoom link through. And apparently, I don't know if they only paid for it for a year or whatever, since I don't work there anymore. They don't pay for it anymore. I don't know. But now my settings are such that I can only do a half-hour call at a time, right? That's why we got booted off. So I'm having GCC send me a Zoom link through them. So that hasn't been done yet. So today I'm anticipating getting booted off in a half hour and then having to just open it back up again. And I'll probably have to upload 2 recordings of it like I did on Wednesday. So that should be straightened out by next week. Once I get the new links, I'll post I'll replace the links that are in Moodle with the new links so that everybody has them, and I'll make sure to send out a message saying if you've bookmarked this, make sure to know that it's a new site. If you go to this new link and re-bookmark it, get rid of your old bookmark. So
All right.
that's where we are there. What I anticipated doing today, or what I'm going to do today, is start the muscle chapter. And I will finish that on Wednesday, which means I will make the exam available on Wednesday rather than today. So we're just a little bit behind the schedule that I posted that I wanted to stick to, but we'll make up time. We'll catch back up. So that's where we are. So don't go looking for an exam this weekend. I'll post it Wednesday. I'll give you through next weekend to do it. But it'll make more sense once we get through both lectures on muscles. Are there any questions before I start sharing my screen? Let me share. If I go to our course under the muscular system, there's the PowerPoint, and there's a Word document that I created with muscles to know, because there are 300 and something muscles. That's just too many to know, right? So I wanted to make sure to narrow that down to just the ones that I want you to know. And I linked up there the crash course in biology for muscles part 1 and part 2. Again, I think it's really helpful, especially once you've gone through the PowerPoint and everything. It's kind of a really good review, really good summary of everything. So I put all that up there. You can see exam 3 is still hidden from you guys. I'll make sure to unhide that for Wednesday. But
Now
today, what's up?
on exam 3, is
Yep.
that only on chapters 6 and 7, or is that on from 2 to 7? or 1 to
It's only
7?
on 6 and 7. It's only on the skeletal
Okay.
system, the muscles.
Okay.
The other thing I should show you guys is Pearson, right? So I went in and I put everything up on Pearson so that all the dates are right and you can see everything. So let me log into that to show you. So if I go to the calendar, right, you can see that here we are on the 15th, right? And so on the 17th at midnight, I put the skeletal system quiz is due. I also created a lab on the muscular system. This I might push off. Yeah, as a matter of fact, let me push that off until Wednesday night. We'll go
I
over that.
already did that because I thought it was due this weekend. So that's the one I emailed you about, because I did that. Because I saw it was due Sunday.
I'm sorry. You
It was
should
hard. It was hard because I wasn't familiar with a lot of the muscles.
the
So
lab.
yeah, for me it was hard. Like some of the pictures, they're like, it's what's this muscle, but they don't give a really good detailed view of where it's exactly at. So
Right.
or it's in a different angle than what's in the book. So
If you want,
kind of hard.
I can clear it out and you can take it again.
My
I can do
anxiety
that.
was through the roof with that one.
Okay. So try,
It took me
try to
6
take it
hours.
again. I don't know if I set it up to allow, I don't know if you can.
There's 63 questions. It took me 6 hours.
Oh my goodness. Let me see what the assignments.
Some of the answers that like, because I couldn't figure out the answers, so I just clicked show me answer, and some of the answers is like I couldn't really find it in the book.
All right. So I just set it up to allow you to take it multiple times. It
Okay.
wasn't set that way, but now it is, so that you can take it multiple times.
Maybe I'll try it again since we can do it that way, but it took me 6 hours to do that lab.
Thanks.
I started at like 7 o'clock in the morning and I didn't finish till almost probably 1:45.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I looked at it and I was like, oh, I don't know what about this one. You know?
Yeah. But if we
Sorry,
can take
guys.
it multiple times, I'll try it again for round 2, but
Right. And maybe it would, maybe if, you know, maybe it'll make more sense after we do a little bit of lecture or something on it.
yeah. It's just I saw it was due Sunday and I have a lot of stuff going on this week, and so I was trying to get everything done before Sunday. And now you can move it.
And,
That's okay.
and then I put the, you know, the muscular system due Friday. And then you can see I've got, from there on, I've got stuff due. I put stuff in. Now, you know, some of these dates, they may change a little bit. I may slide stuff by a couple of days here and there. But at least this way you have a general idea of what's going on through November and December, right? I put them all up there for you guys.
Okay. When is our last class?
December 17th.
Yeah, I think the 17th is our last class, and I think the 20th is when the final exam is.
Okay. Because the 20th, I know I have jury duty on that morning, so I'm trying to figure out, like, is it going to be online so I can take it sooner?
Yes, it'll be online. Yep,
Okay. That's what
absolutely.
I was worried about, because I have to be in Northampton at 8 a.m. So, yeah, I got a jury duty notice.
Can't get out of that.
No. I'd like to try, but
Well, sometimes they just don't hold, you know, they just don't hold a trial, or you don't get picked, which is always nice, because then you've served your duty for like 3 years anyway.
I haven't got one in 20 years, and now I get one.
Oh, geez. All right.
All righty.
So let's go into, and Josh has joined us. Let's go into the chapter 7, the muscular system. So Josh, I was just showing everybody that I put up all the assignments on mastering right? So those are all in there. The dates are all in there now.
I see it. I
And
did one of the quizzes last night.
okay,
Yeah. Sorry, I just got in
um,
the shower. Yes, I'll pull the tape off the camera in a second.
what's that? So I was also saying that I'll probably get kicked off again at 10 o'clock and we'll have to rejoin again. And then hopefully by next week, that'll be straightened out. And I'll have a new link to join these meetings through Zoom. So I figure we'll go through the muscular system today and Wednesday, and I will make the exam available on Wednesday, right? So it's rather than in our syllabus, I had it, where I would make it available today. I'll just make that available on Wednesday, and we'll be a little bit behind the syllabus, but we should be okay. We should be fine. So I also showed that in the Moodle course, I did provide a list of the muscles that you need to know, the specific muscles, because there are so many of them. So make sure you're paying attention to that, even though we won't really get to naming the muscles, I don't think, until Wednesday. Okay. So muscles. Muscles are one of the 4 primary tissues, right? If we take any tissue in the body, it's going to either be epithelial, connective, muscle, or nervous. We talked about epithelial and connective kind of in some detail. We didn't really talk about muscle tissue other than to say there are 3 types: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. Of those 3, skeletal is voluntary, right? Anything that we can consciously control is controlled by skeletal muscle, where cardiac and smooth are involuntary. So most of what we're talking about in this chapter is how skeletal muscle works, right? Because skeletal muscles are all over the body. They are, doing almost everything, almost all the work in our body. We are talking about them. So skeletal muscles are composed of skeletal muscle tissue, but they also contain some connective tissue, a lot of nerves, and a lot of blood vessels. They're called skeletal because they are attached to bones, right? They're attached to part of your skeleton. And the muscular system includes about 700 skeletal muscles. Again, this is why I made a list of the ones you need to know, right? So that we don't have to try to memorize all of them. So what kinds of things does skeletal muscle do? Well, movement, obviously, right? Movement is the biggest thing that it does. Again, we'll learn that the muscles just get shorter, which doesn't do a whole lot. But if you attach one end of that muscle to a bone, when it gets shorter, it pulls the bone with it. And that is what creates movement, right? That's what accomplishes a whole lot. So by doing that, by causing movement, we can do things like even maintain our posture and our body position. So even though we're not moving, you're still fighting against gravity, right? If you're standing up, you're still fighting against gravity, trying to maintain that body position. A lot of the muscles support soft tissues. So like in your abdominal wall, your abdominal cavity, your pelvic cavity, a lot of the surrounding tissue is made of skeletal muscle, and that's there to kind of protect and support a lot of your organs. Guarding entrances and exits. There are circular muscles that encircle the openings of the digestive and urinary tracts, right? They're usually called sphincters. We'll learn about several of them even in the skeletal or even in the digestive system, in between the different regions of the digestive system. They basically just separate the different regions. And then muscle contractions generate heat, maintains body temperature, right? If you go outside on a cold morning, what does your body inadvertently start doing?
Goosebumps or shivering.
Goosebumps or shivering, good. That's because muscles contract. When you go outside and it's a cold morning and your body gets cold or senses that cold, it's going to try to warm up, right? And so part of that is contracting a bunch of muscles to produce heat, right? Think about if you go to the gym or you go for a run, you start sweating because you have to cool off, because you're producing so much heat and generating so much heat by using those muscles. So make sure you know these 5 primary skeletal muscle functions. Again, these are skeletal muscle functions. This is not, we're not talking about cardiac or smooth muscle at this point. So how is the muscle organized? Like what we think of as a whole muscle is actually a lot of bundles, like thousands and thousands of bundles. Okay, what we think of as a whole muscle is in this picture down here, right? And so they're taking a picture from his forearm. A lot of books do it from the biceps because that's kind of, you know, one of the easiest for us to visualize. If you look at that whole muscle, there are smaller bundles in there, right? So the muscle itself is composed of smaller bundles. Now the muscle is surrounded by a connective tissue sheath called the epimysium, right? Epi is outer, so it's the outermost layer. Well, each of these little bundles that are in there are called fascicles, right? So you can see a whole skeletal muscle is really bundles of these fascicles. And they've pulled one fascicle out here and they've taken a cross section through it. And that's what's in B, part B of this figure, is a fascicle. Now each fascicle is surrounded by its own connective tissue layer called the perimysium. And if you look at a fascicle, it's actually made up of bundles, right? And they take one of those bundles and they pull it out. And here's the picture of that bundle pulled out. See, that's a muscle fiber, or sometimes it's called a muscle cell. So when we looked at a microscope, what we were looking at muscle cells, we were looking at this level of organization, okay, which you can see is surrounded by its own connective tissue called the endomysium. It has, you can see a capillary, it has blood vessels going to it. There is something called the sarcolemma surrounding it, which we'll talk about. There are multiple nuclei. There's a dark blue one here. There's a dark blue one at the bottom. Okay, this is a muscle cell, muscle fiber, or a muscle cell. So what we call a whole muscle is a bundle of fascicles, and each fascicle is a bundle of muscle cells. Each muscle cell, when you look in there, there are smaller things in there, right? Each muscle cell is a bundle of what are called myofibrils. And I'm going to skip to, this just to show you that. So what this is showing here, this bigger cylinder up top, is a muscle cell or a muscle fiber. What they're pulling out is one of those little bundles called the myofibril. So what we call a whole muscle is myofibrils bundled together as muscle cells. Those muscle cells are bundled together as fascicles. Those fascicles are bundled together as a whole muscle. Okay, it's bundles of bundles of bundles. What we're going to study is how one of those myofibrils gets shorter. Now that's not very powerful, right? That's one of these little red dots in here. Not very strong. But if you can get thousands of them to get shorter at the same time, well, then they can do a whole lot of work. And that's kind of the point of a muscle, is that you can get thousands of these fibers to contract at the same time, then this whole muscle becomes pretty strong. So in the muscular system, we have more than just muscular tissue, right? We have skeletal muscle tissue, but we have collagen fibers from all layers of connective tissue. So there are connective tissues that connect the muscles to the bones, right? And those are called tendons. Those are made of dense, regular connective tissue. And then where the tendons appear as just like a large sheet, it's called an aponeurosis. Connects muscles to each other, connects one muscle to another muscle. And you'll see in the body, there are a few places where we have aponeurosis. There are also extensive networks of blood vessel and skeletal muscles. Skeletal muscles need a lot of energy, right? You need a lot of energy to do all those contractions. Well, what things does the body need to make energy? What nutrients do we need to make energy?
Protein.
not protein.
Nutrients. Huh?
What is it, Peter?
I say minerals. And all that.
Minerals. Okay. What else? What do we use to make ATP? Who knows? We use carbohydrates and oxygen.
Oh,
Right?
carbo.
All of our immediate energy comes from carbohydrates and oxygen. So glucose and oxygen, sugar and oxygen. And we get the sugars by eating things. We get the oxygen by breathing. But how do we get that around the body? Right? That only gets it into either our intestines or our lungs. How do we get it from there to all these other places in the body?
Through blood.
To the blood. Good. So there is this extensive network of blood vessels running through all of our skeletal muscles. That network of blood vessels, those blood vessels are bringing glucose and oxygen. They're bringing things that our muscles need to make energy. Okay. We'll also see that because these skeletal muscles are under voluntary control, that means they need to be stimulated by our central nervous system. We need to have some connection from our brain to each of those skeletal muscles. And so we have axons, we have these nerve fibers that run through the connective tissues, and they actually attach to the muscle cells so that we can get a signal. We can get a tiny little electrical signal from our brain to our muscle, telling that muscle to contract. So the whole point of these couple of slides is that we're not just talking about skeletal muscle, we're talking about dense regular connective tissue, we're talking about blood vessels, we're talking about neurons. All of these things are part of the skeletal muscle or of the muscular system. So now we shift to talking about skeletal muscle fibers. Again, you have a whole muscle, which is made of bundles, which are called fascicles. And each fascicle is a bundle of muscle fibers, right? So that's what we're looking at, these small fibers in this part right here. These small fibers have multiple nuclei. They have more than one nucleus, and they have this repeating pattern of actin and myosin that we'll talk about that makes them look like they're striped. Okay. Each of these muscle fibers or muscle cells is also surrounded by a plasma membrane, just like any cells. And the plasma membrane for the muscles is called the sarcolemma, right? And it surrounds the cell, surrounds with the cytoplasm, or in the muscles case, it's called the sarcoplasm. Okay, and the sarcolemma is a little bit different. It's a plasma membrane that's a little bit different than other plasma membranes in that it contains little openings that lead into a network of tubules called T-tubules. And the reason for this is the T-tubules allow you to get a signal from a neuron into that muscle fiber, right? So there's all these little openings, you're sending a signal, the signal is traveling down these T-tubules, and that signal can get to the sarcolemma, which surrounds each muscle fiber. This is going to allow for that muscle fiber to contract, to get shorter. Within the muscle fiber, there are these tiny little cylinder-shaped structures running the length of the muscle fiber called myofibrils, right? There are thousands in each fiber. So you've got myofibrils bundled as muscle fibers, which are bundled as fascicles, which are bundled as whole muscles. The myofibrils are the ones that are composed of thick and thin filaments. So it's alternating thick, thin, thick, thin, thick, thin. The thin ones are composed of actin. The thick ones are composed of myosin. So actin and myosin are just proteins, right? And you just have a strand of actin proteins, then a strand of myosin proteins, another strand of actin, another strand of myosin. And when these myofibrils shorten, when they get shorter, that creates muscle fiber contraction because all of the myofibrils within a muscle fiber get shorter. That muscle fiber gets shorter. A certain amount of muscle fibers within a fascicle get shorter, so the whole muscle gets shorter. So now we get to and this is all hopefully going to come together in a few minutes. We get to a specialized smooth ER, right? So cells have smooth ER, and it's there to make lipids, and it's there to kind of finalize the shape on certain proteins. Well, around each myofibril, you have a network of sarcoplasmic reticulum. Instead of ER, it's SR, sarcoplasmic reticulum. The sarcoplasmic reticulum is open to the T tubules. So remember that the signal is coming through the T tubules and it's hitting the sarcoplasmic reticulum. The sarcoplasmic reticulum contains calcium. It's a storage site for calcium ions. Okay, we'll see that calcium is necessary for myofibrils to contract. So each myofibril is surrounded by a network of kind of a membrane called the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which contains calcium. So the triad is the combination of these, where these two tubules meet, the sarcoplasmic reticulum and the T tubule. Okay. The units within myofilaments, and I'll show this to you on a slide in a minute, are called sarcomeres. Right? And so each myofibril has about 10,000 sarcomeres from one end to the other. And the arrangement of those thick and thin filaments, the alternating arrangement kind of makes them look straight. So here is, again, this big cylinder, which I had skipped to earlier, is a muscle cell or a muscle fiber, same thing. And what they're pulling out here is one myofiber. And what you can see in yellow, these are the T tubules. So the signal is going to come through these T tubules. They're connected to this blue stuff, which surrounds each myofibril. That's the sarcoplasmic reticulum. That's where the calcium is stored. Okay. They have a lot of mitochondria because mitochondria are making energy. You have multiple nuclei. And what they're showing down here is just one myofibril, just this that's pulled out. It looks striped because you've got these alternating thick and thin filaments, right? So in this case, the thin filaments are these pink ones and the thick ones are purple. The thin ones are made of actin, the thick ones are made of myosin. And here is a cross section. So they just took a knife and cut through here. You can see the thick filaments and the thin filaments. What's going to happen is those thick and thin filaments are going to slide past each other, and that allows for the whole myofibril to get shorter. Okay. Now within the sarcomere, there are all these different markings or these different lines. The first thing to notice are the Z lines, where the actin filaments end and the next actin filaments begin. That's called the Z line, and it's Z because it stands for zigzag. And the distance from one Z line to the next is a sarcomere. That's that unit, right? We said there's probably 10,000 sarcomeres on one myofibril. So the unit that we're talking about is this distance from one Z line to the next. We also have an M line. At the center of each sarcomere is the M line, right? So think of M as middle, right? That's right at the center of each sarcomere. Here's the M line. We have an A band, an I band, and an H band, and this is the part that gets a little confusing. The A band is the darker region running the length of the thick filaments. It includes the zone of overlap containing both thick and thin filaments. So the A band is where the thick and thin filaments overlap, right? So you can see that this is the A band right here. What you're seeing is the purple myosin and the pink actin are overlapping. So it goes all the way. It's basically the length of the myosin, right? From one end of myosin to the other end of myosin. And the actin overlaps a little bit into there. That's an A band. The I band is the lighter region, which includes the Z line. So the I band is everything outside the myosin filaments, right? So the I band only contains actin filaments. You don't see any of the purple myosin in there. And then the H band is where there would only be myosin right at the middle here. There's no actin in there, right? So the A band contains all the way out to even where the actin and the myosin overlap, whereas the I band only, or I'm sorry, the H band only includes where there is myosin. So make sure you know the different bands and lines. Okay, so we have the thin filament. Thin filament's made of actin. It's just a chain of actin, right? At rest, when the muscles are at rest, and we're about to get cut off here. So when we get cut off, I'll just rejoin. Yes, honey, hold on. Hold on. When we the thick filaments are at rest, they are covered up by tropomyosin and troponin. Okay. The thick filaments, which are made of myosin, want to grab onto the thin filaments. So they see a specific site on the thin filaments called the active site. Right? Myosin sees that active site and grabs a hold of the thin filament at that actin site. But the problem is when the muscles are relaxed, that actin site is covered up by tropomyosin and troponin. So myosin can't see that active site. It can't grab onto actin. And that's going to be always the problem. What myosin wants to do, it wants to grab actin right there and slide the actin filaments in closer to the middle, but it can't do that if tropomyosin and troponin are in the way. And so here is a picture of organization of the sarcomere, right? Your Z lines, your N lines, and then down below what they show are the filaments up a little bit closer, right? And then they show it even closer. Here's your thick filaments, here's your thin filaments. And at rest, this is a thin filament, this is actin. The pink is actin. The blue is troponin and tropomyosin, and it's sitting there in the way, right? What you want is myosin has these little heads, right? These little things that stick out. Myosin wants to grab a hold of actin at the active site. Okay, it wants to grab onto it, pull it in closer to the center. But it can't see the active site because troponin and tropomyosin are in the way. So actin or myosin can't grab actin. It can't make the muscles contract. So how do the muscles contract? Well, there's this, the theory is the sliding filament theory. This is widely accepted as to how these sarcomeres contract. Basically, what happens, and again, here's a myofibril. Here's a close-up of the myofibril. The thick filaments are purple, the thin filaments are pink. You can see the little heads on the thick filament. They're going to reach up and grab the pink, pull the pink in closer to the center, right? So the whole sarcomere gets shorter. Nothing changes about the length of the purple line. The length of the purple line is the same. The length of the pink line, the length of the actin filament is the same. All that's happened is the actin filaments went from being out here to being in here, right? They got shorter. They got pulled closer to the middle. If you know that this middle part here, this middle line is the M line, everything gets closer to that M line, right? That's all that's happening. But in order for myosin to grab onto actin and do that, troponin has to be out of the way. Troponin and tropomyosin are in the way. Well, it turns out that, we'll go back to this. It turns out that troponin and tropomyosin would rather bind to calcium than actin. So remember that this entire myofibril is surrounded by SR, sarcoplasmic reticulum, which is a storage site for calcium. So when the neuron sends a signal and the SR releases calcium, all of a sudden that troponin and tropomyosin, which were on actin, they all bind to calcium. And so they get off of that active site. And as long as there's calcium around, they're bound to calcium. They're not sitting on active. If they're not in the way, if they're not sitting on active, then myosin can see where to grab actin and to pull the actin in closer to the middle. Right, so the myosin heads bind to the active sites on the actin. And then once they bind, that's called a cross bridge, they're just attached. The heads then pivot. So they go from this position to the inward position. And what that does is it pulls the actin in, it pulls it closer to the middle. Then the cross bridge is detached, they let go. And they have to let go by the binding of a molecule of ATP. So a molecule of energy binds to them and that causes them to let go. And then they can shift, so they bind, they're here, then they shift to this position. Then when they get enough ATP, they let go, and then they move back, they pivot back to their original position. Now that they're in their original position, they can grab on again, pull closer, let go, detach, grab again, pull closer. That's how this cycle keeps going over and over again. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop there. I'm just going to get off for a second because it's going to kick me off in a minute. And then everybody, if you guys can just rejoin and we'll go through this a little bit more. I just want to go through in about 5 or 10 more minutes before I let you guys go today. Okay. So I'll see you guys in just a couple of minutes.
All right.
Alrighty.